Hello, everybody. This is Nashville Demystified. I am Alex Steed. More often than not, Nashville Demystified features a conversation with a relatively new Nashvilleian about something I'd like to understand further. And then I talk with someone who's been here longer and is presumably an expert in that area or arena, I suppose. Today, we divert from format just slightly because I'm actually in the great state of Maine for a wedding this week, and so we'll forgo our weekly chat with a new Nashvilleian and cut straight to a conversation with Michael Eades. Nashville Demystified, I should tell you, is brought to you by Knack Factory, a commercial video and content production company with offices here in the city, and it's also brought to you by We Own This Town. We Own This Town is a collection of podcasts based here in Nashville. And this leads me straight to our conversation with Michael. For those of you who don't know, Michael is the creator of this network, and he's the host of We Own This Town, a show that shares a name with the network. And it serves as an introduction to all sorts of music that touches on or has roots here in the city. In today's episode, we talk about Nashville podcasts and how this network came to be. I met Michael through a friend of ours whose name is Brian Bruckman. He's this guy based in Brooklyn. Brian and I think Brian and Michael all met each other on the internet back in the 1990s. And so when Brian heard that I was moving to this city, he told me I absolutely had to meet Michael. I'm glad I did because he's so clearly interested and devoted in the city and in its music, and he was so generous with his time. And after meeting him and after he told me he had this network, I immediately thought of podcasts that I would like to create, and that is how this one came to be. Really, I can't say enough good about Michael. I can't say enough about We Own This Town and the crew of folks who all make it a reality. I've had the good fortune to hang and spend time with these people, most notably on Record Store Day. And they've just certainly made this new guy in particular feel very welcome in this new place. But before we get to Michael, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Consider giving it a review if you can and sharing with a friend. We're on Instagram and Twitter at Nashville Demystified, and we are on the Bruce Willis Blues album that is Facebook. If you have any feedback you want to send to me directly or ideas for future shows, you can reach me at podcast@knack-factory.com. That is podcast@knack-factory.com. We recorded this interview with Michael at the We Own This Town podcast, studio, headquarters. It was the first time that we all hung. You'll hear his cat, the office cat, who hangs in the office for the first little while, and then it chills a bit. It's actually quite endearing. Michael's a sweet dude, just all around a lovely guy who has a lot to say about music. He has a lot of experience here in the area. He has opinions, and he's just a joy to talk to. I really can't say enough about him. I'm not paid to be on this podcast. I'm not an employee. I'm someone who does this because I'm interested in this mission and these people. I'm interested in understanding this new place where I live. And Michael, I don't think is either. And he just gives a lot of time and energy to making sure the people like me who are on this network making shows are able to do so. I mean, he really puts a lot into making this happen, and it's quite admirable. I really appreciate and look up to him. So without further ado, here is Michael Eades. What do you, in relationship to what I do, what do you do?
Wait, you mean in your real life or in your hobby?
In my hobby life.
So your hobby life is this show, Nashville Demystified.
Yes.
And my hobby life is running We Own This Town, a podcast network that distributes shows such as yourselves, your own.
How did that happen?
So actually, We Own This Town is way older than I generally give it credit for or generally advertise. I've been running it for 14 years. Basically, as a little bit of history of Nashville, there was a blog around town that was all about like Nashville band rumors. Like, oh, we heard this band got in a big fight. This band broke up. This like really trashy kind of rumory stuff, but it was very entertaining. And then the guy running that was just like, all right, I've been doing this for a couple of years. I'm kind of tired of it. I think he moved to California, kind of put it to bed. And in the wake of that, like people were looking for a place to go. And this, man, my cat is just meowing like crazy.
I love it.
We can let her in, but it might get worse. Anyway, so in the wake of that, this guy, Doug Lehman, created a site called We Own This Town. And it was basically the exact same thing, just like show listings and then like band rumors. And he also was sort of thinking, oh, I will make a radio show out of this. I'll film bands, I'll record bands. It'll basically be like my radio show that I did in college, but it'll be local bands, but I'll put it out on the internet. And this was like, you know, podcasts existed back then, but they weren't a thing. They weren't like in the general vernacular of people. So it was kind of ahead of its time, really, but that also means that no one knew what to do with it. It was like, here's an RSS feed, put this in a thing, and then you'll get new episodes.
Right.
Like, what? What the hell's an RSS feed? So as Doug was doing that, I kind of caught wind of it and was like, man, I love what you're doing. Can I help? Like, what can I do? I want to contribute. I'll write music reviews. I will write news articles. I'll put together episodes. And he was all for having some collaboration. And so I came in and I started putting together all that stuff, started contributing to the site, and just basically took over. Like, he saw that I was taking it and just let me take it. And so I've been running it in various incarnations for years, like over a decade. Right. Mostly music reviews primarily. And then when I moved back from New York 2 years ago, I was like, I'm going to make We Own This Town into a podcast network and make it more than just music. Like, that's where my bread and butter is. That's where my understanding of the scene is for the most part. But I wanted to expand to more voices than that. Like, just there's so much good talent in town, so many amazing things and creative people that I didn't want to just like relegate that to just a small amount of new music coming out. Like, I mean, your show is a great example of that. Like, what an interesting thing that, you know, people should hear about. Like, what's your experience moving to Nashville? I couldn't do that on a music review site.
Right.
So that was kind of the genesis of it.
What do you learn from listening to the city through the ears of all of the people who produce podcasts for the network?
What do I learn about the city through that? There's the practical aspect of it, like the show we do that's all about bars and restaurants. This is the place. I learn about places that I might want to go check out, like bars and restaurants that I want to visit. And I think other listeners will benefit from that as well. But, you know, the other side of that is like there's a beverage podcast we do called Liquid Gold. And it's just about like, here's a history of the tiki drinks involving rum. And like, that's a wealth of knowledge that exists in Nashville that I would have never given it credit for. Like, do we have good bartenders? Yes. Do we have bartenders that have like encyclopedic knowledge of a kind of drink? I would have never thought that. So it really kind of pushes the whole theory of We Own This Town, which is Nashville is more than Music Row. And so talking to these people through podcasts and talking about the different subject matter, it really just emphasizes that idea that like it's way more than that. There's so much stuff here. There's so much comedy. There's so much like brilliant mixologists, which is a horrible word, but it's a thing. It's a word that people use. You know, and there's like food, you know, when you ask people about Nashville food, they're like, oh yeah, hot chicken, you got to have it.
Right.
There's so much more than that, you know, like just a wealth of diversity here that we don't get credit for from the high surface level,
right.
Which is probably true of any city, but you know, that's where I land with it. It's just verifying that we're more than that.
Yeah, I think like that's sort of been the task around understanding what Nashville is outside of just like Music Row, right? Is that it's like there are a lot of other things, and you have a really interesting front row seat into understanding sort of what some of those things are through the eyes and ears of your producers.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. What and you obviously are focused on music.
Yeah.
And you have a podcast that shines light on music. That that comes out of the city and has come out of the city. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's true. It's all local music. I do surrounding areas like Murfreesboro. There's actually like a pretty cool scene in Clarksville, which you would have never thought. And there's just bands all over. Like I try and keep it probably within a 30-40 mile radius. Like I'm not going to cover Chattanooga bands or Memphis bands because those have their own identity.
Take that, Chattanooga and Memphis.
Sorry guys, you have great scenes that you can cover on your own. But yeah, I just I'd been doing We Own This Town for so long and had been doing a podcast about local music primarily that was just like, here's 10 songs back to back. No talking. I was never like a presence on the podcast. I just was putting out local music. And then when I moved back and kind of rebooted the site as this new thing, it was like, I think I got to talk on the show. I got to give it a personality and let people know why I picked these songs rather than just you trust me.
Right. Here
are the songs. It's more like, this, here's the reasons why I picked these songs.
Right.
So now I actually talk on the show, which for me is, I don't know about you, but hearing my recorded voice is woefully unpleasant sometimes.
No, it's the worst. And now I can actually hear my recorded voice in my head. Oh. So when I talk, so it's doubly the worst. I'm just like, ugh, this guy again. So Nashville music is not all... and this is not a problem. This is Jason Aldean is not a problem, but it's not all Jason Aldean, right? There's there are a lot of things happening, and I'm sure you probably hear this a lot when you talk about Nashville music outside of people who are from Nashville who make an assumption that it's one thing, but how do you describe what it is beyond the obvious imagery and things that come into people's mind when they think about Nashville?
How do I describe it? I guess I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I think that I just try and impress upon people that every genre of music is here, and a lot of it is very mature. It just doesn't get the spotlight on it that Music Row does, because Music Row has this historical stranglehold on the city that's this is what Nashville's all about, but it's there's an electronic scene here that's really awesome. There's actually a metal scene that's really interesting. There are country music artists that I feel exist outside of Music Row that are fascinating. Third Man Records, which is very much in the mainstream, does a really good job of highlighting those country artists that are existing outside of Music Row. Margot Price is phenomenal, right. Joshua Headley's album's amazing. Teddy and the Rough Riders just did a 7-inch that's really good. So there's country artists and they could fall into that Music Row world, but they just don't. They don't exist in there. Right. So I think you can start there and say there is country music, there is Margot Price, there is XYZ, but then there's also, and just name a bunch of psych rock bands and, experimental electronic outfits, stuff like that. So that's a terrible answer, I think.
No, I don't think it is. I think that it, I think that to me is one of the most, in one of the earlier episodes, I talked with Brittany Haas, who's a fiddler. And when I was talking about different kinds of music that I'd heard about, she's like, well, I want to hear about that because, I think that people sort of get into their own genre sometimes, and it's hard. Yeah. When you're trying to keep up within that, it's hard to know all the other things that are necessarily happening, especially for people. I'm really interested in the phenomenon of all these people who are on the road all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then they come home here, and that this is an interesting sort of, petri dish of where they're able to experiment and see other things that are happening.
I think it's like anything, your social circle sort of dictates a lot of those experiences. So if you're a fiddler, you're probably hanging out with people that are in that world, even just a little bit, a couple steps removed or whatever. So you're kind of hearing that music and experiencing those things because that's what your life is. And you kind of have to force yourself to step out of it a little bit. And I think that happens in every circle. If you're really into DIY, you're probably spending a ton of time at Dark Matter and this all ages venue that's over on Dickerson Road. It's amazing. They have incredible booking there. They're doing a phenomenal job. But even then, you're probably not going to find out that like there's a bunch of DJs in town that do really good stuff over at Rosemary and what is that place called? I'll just call it over at Rosemary, over in 5 Points. It has this Rosemary and Beauty Queen. It's RBQ, but Beauty Queen is supposed to be a bar in the back that has yet to open because of lots of red tape from the city.
Sure. Do they have a home studio back there?
They do not have a home studio back there. No, but I mean, you end up getting stuck in those places that are like, that's what you experience. So you have to like force yourself to be like, okay, I spend all my time at Dark Matter. I'm going to force myself to go to the Cobra, and I'm going to see some like dirtier psych rock. Or I'm going to go to the East Room. And like, there's always overlap between those things, especially the ones I'm citing currently. But you do have to make that effort if you really want to get that diversity, I think. And that's not always easy because like your friends aren't at Rosemary.
Right.
But drag them along. They'll probably have a good time.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to be myopic about my experience and then suggest it's everyone's experience, but one tends to get older and the compulsion to go out becomes less and less.
Absolutely.
You're like, I just really want to make a drink at home and hang out. Yeah. But when you go out, you're always sort of pleasantly surprised by what.
Yeah. And, this is a problem with Nashville and being a Nashvilleian is that I really cherish places where there isn't music. And like, it's sometimes very hard to find. Like, I can remember a restaurant near my house when I lived in 12 South. And it was like this great bar. They had really simple food. It was so relaxed there. Great, huge front porch. Really enjoyed hanging out there. And at about 5 p.m. every weekend, a band would start setting up. And I was like, shit, we got to leave. Yeah. Like, I don't want to fight the band to like have a conversation and relax, And that happens all over. Like everywhere in Nashville is a venue. And sometimes it's awesome, especially if you're an out-of-towner or you're new. Like, it's really charming. But if you've been here a while and you don't go out that much, sometimes when you go out, you want to just be like, I would like to hear you while we're speaking, I don't want to compete with them.
Yeah.
So
I had a professor who was my mentor in college, and he was a Serbian academic, left-wing academic who fought, he and his friends like fought Milosevic and all this stuff. But he anytime we'd go to a bar or a restaurant that just had music above, a 3 out of 10, he'd be like, who asked for this? This is terrorism, really. Like, I just want to eat my food and not have music that I didn't ask for played at me. Yeah. So he would do very poorly. And,
he would not enjoy it here.
Does Nashville have what Austin has, which is like music at grocery stores?
Like bands playing?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge yet, but I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
Feels like a real Austin move, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. I know, well, they're the home of Whole Foods, right?
Yes.
So you got to have the bands play at the Whole Foods.
That's what happens. Yeah. This is a total aside, but I was at a networking event the other day, and I'm after this, I'm going to talk with this this curator. Whose name is Jason Sean, and he's a film writer, curator, etc. From the Belcourt, and I'm going to talk with him about the movie Nashville, which I'm sort of have a small obsession with. Yeah, and I brought up Nashville the other day at a art opening to a man who was in his 50s. He owns like some sort of branding firm or something like that. And I knew that Nashville, the city, had a problem with the movie Nashville when it came out, but I haven't seen it in action. And I brought it up to him, and he was like, I still hate that movie.
I've never seen it. Never seen it.
We're gonna dive in. I'm bringing you into it at some point.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I don't know. Now I'm more intrigued because it's like a classic film that I've always had some guilt around not having seen. But to hear that it's controversial as a person that lives here, like, oh, you're gonna hate it.
Right. Well,
then now I have to see it.
The way that this got weird immediately because he said he got weird about it, and he just seemed like a reasonable person. Yeah. Right? And he said, well, it was a weird spoof of the city, and I think people outside of the city didn't realize it was a spoof. And I was like, well, I just read it as a movie about 19 people who have some level of like unmanageable vanity, which seems pretty on point for the city.
It does.
He was like, yeah. And then I was like, I'm bad at networking.
Well, I mean, isn't that like Portlandia? Like
Yeah,
Portlandia is a
precisely.
stereotype, but there's some truth in there.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy about what do you enjoy? You spent a lot of time in New York.
I lived there for 4 years.
Yeah.
Which is like, if you lived in New York now and then I told you that I lived there for 4 years, you'd be like,
what do you enjoy about this scene versus that scene? And you don't have to paint them as different, but like, is there something more about accessibility, or what do you enjoy?
well, my experiences were very different because I grew up in Franklin here. I went to school in Murfreesboro, and then I moved to Nashville. So like I've always been like, since high school, I've been around bands and like kind of been following different people. So like I've been aware of the scene from a very young age. So it wasn't like hard to crack because I've always just been in it and monitoring it and aware of it. In New York, I moved there for a job, and I was like, okay, what bands do I go see? What are the venues that people go to? Like, I didn't have any of those resources. So for me, my experience with music in New York was wildly different. Like I barely went to shows. Like I would see touring acts, but I didn't know anything about the local scene. I would go to some local shows if like a friend from Nashville was touring through. I would go see them, and then I would see the opening bands and be like, wow, that was like a doom metal band that opened, and that was phenomenal. I will have to make a note to follow along with them. But yeah, I just didn't, I thought New York was very hard to be in a band, just like ridiculously impractical. Like, where's your practice space going to be?
Right.
That's another $600 a month on top of your wildly expensive rent. How are you going to get your gear from your apartment in this neighborhood in Brooklyn to anywhere else and not spend an arm and a leg? Like, it seemed like being in a band there was way harder. Like,
right.
Here, there's there's traffic here, but like everyone already has cars, so you can just load your car up with your gear and get it to the venue. And, it just seems easier to be in a band here than it does there.
And Nashville has, I mean, even though there are issues that I've delved into, and I'm sure we'll delve into more around, gentrification and development, like Nashville has land in a way that New York is what New York is forever.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, totally.
And to get from point A to point B, it inevitably takes an hour and 10 minutes.
Right.
Whereas here, like even when it's at its worst, you can have space and
yeah. I mean, I know that the traffic has gotten bad here, but I can get from my house near 8th Avenue to like Mickey's way over on the other side of town 15 minutes consistently.
Yeah,
and that's like everywhere in town. You can get there in 15 minutes. Maybe 20 if you decide to drive during rush hour or you take a stupid path through downtown. But for me personally, my personal experience, the traffic hasn't been like horrible. Nashville's pretty traversable, I think.
I've only gotten stuck like in I think like a Vanderbilt thing once.
Yeah.
And it was like 47 minutes to get a mile. And that was I feel like that was just the situation.
Yeah.
But I think you do that once and you're like, you hate cars for the rest of your life.
I mean, I've been stuck on the interstate and it's awful. There's a train right here by the studio that inevitably, if I cross the train tracks, the train will come and catch me, and I will be stuck in a zone that will prevent me from coming back here every single time.
That is a thing that will resonate with literally everyone who lives in this city.
Yeah.
It's like,
The train, man.
it's like a really rude ghost.
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple years back, there was a big controversy, I'm putting heavy quotes on that, around the train horns. And like, I think particularly in your neighborhood over in Inglewood, they were like, you have to stop with the train horns. It's like, well, the train horns warn people that a giant train is coming and that they would die if they don't move.
You enjoy not being killed by trains, right?
Yeah, and it was just like there was like petitions and like, people were really upset, like, stop the train horns, it's so disruptive. It was like, it serves a purpose. Like, I can't argue with the train horn. Please keep doing the train horn.
Yeah.
It's fine. Like, when I lived in New York, I lived in Brooklyn, and we lived literally underneath the subway. Right. So like every time the F and the G train went by, we would hear it. And you just eventually are like, it's like the ocean. It's just like a noise that's around. You don't really care.
Yeah, exactly. So. You just absorb it. What I think you do really well on your show?
Do tell.
Is we know each other through a mutual contact and acquaintance and friend called Brian Bruckman, and
called
I like that. We call him Brian Bruckman. That's what I call him because that's his name. Yeah. And he and Brian, when he used to live in Portland, Maine, he lives in New York now. He does a lot of sort of music organizing, always has.
He is the origin of us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He is the origin of us. Brian was always the person who, in Portland, Maine, I trusted to tell me what was worth my time.
Yeah.
And I think on your show, I think that this comes from you adding your voice probably. And I was familiar with what we were doing beforehand. You sort of are bringing people through the kind of music that you're sharing with them.
Right.
And it's very different sort of song to song. You know, there's there's certainly a median level of quality.
Right.
But it's very different, and you are sharing stuff with like how it compares to other music, like what the access points, what the entry points are. And I think like you do very well by being that person probably for people. Is that
great?
Yeah.
I feel like I have a deficit in a lot of genres where like hip hop is almost never played on the show because I don't know anything about hip hop and I don't know where to follow it. I don't know where to discover it. Like primarily a lot of my discovery comes from like asking friends what they're listening to, scouring Bandcamp for stuff. But like if it's not on there, I just don't see it, you know, and I do a really bad job of covering hip hop, and I know there's a really strong scene. I'm just not aware of it. So that happens from time to time with random genres, but I'm trying to do better. And part of that is reaching out to people that I know, like have those insights and trying to like lean on them a little bit where I'm not doing a great job. But in general, yeah, I mean, I think Nashville has so much rad stuff. Like there's weeks on the podcast where I'm like, I'm only supposed to play 8 songs, but I have a lot here. All right. And I have to like make cuts. And sometimes it's difficult, you know? But I also try and keep the show like 40 minutes. Like if I'm asking someone for their time, like 40 minutes seems like a good number.
Yeah.
So
who was that for you when you were getting into music? Like who brought you on that journey?
You know, I worked when I was in college. I guess, I don't know. I've always been like sort of musically obsessive in a way. Like when I was in high school, I loved that band, They Might Be Giants. And that was like, get everything from them. Like not only their full-length albums, but like go find all the singles, listen to all the B-sides, go on the internet and, you know, Prodigy at the time for my age, and just like find out all about the band. And then like, oh, well, that leads to John Linnell has a solo record. You should check that out. And then, you know, John Flansburgh has another side project that's this. So like there was kind of like already that behavior instilled in me to sort of investigate in that way. If you like They Might Be Giants, you'll like this band kind of thing. And then in college, I worked for a small record label called Sponge Bath Records. And at the time, this is like late 90s, 97, 2001, like Sponge Bath was like on the map. Like they got written up in Billboard. They had like a big story. There was a bunch of bands on the label that like kind of were very popular around town, and they supported a lot of other local bands in town. And the local scene in Murfreesboro was awesome. There were so many good bands. And I think that just like... it was not a conscious decision. It was just sort of like, okay, I love these bands that are on the label. They're playing with these other bands at the Borough tonight. I love them now. I'm going to go see them when they play. And it was just like part of being in college. Like the thing that I ended up doing the most was going to shows. And then when I moved to Nashville, it just sort of continued because all those people also moved to Nashville and played with new bands and stuff. So
how did you find They Might Be Giants originally?
I'm fairly certain there are two en routes there. Tiny Toons for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Istanbul, not Constantinople.
Yes, that was probably a big one. I think the other thing was there was a really good local radio station. You know Lightning 100.
Yes.
There used to be a sister station called Thunder 94. And so they were Lightning and Thunder. Yeah. And the DJs on Thunder 94 were amazing. Like the music they played was incredible. This is before like, you know, playlists were sort of, you know, come down from on high. And I don't think Lightning 100 necessarily falls into that camp either. I think they're independent. I think they're picking their music. But there's a lot of homogeny in, you know, commercial radio in general. Sure. But Thunder 94 was like, it hit the sweet spot for me. And one of the DJs played Anna Eng on there. Is that, am I saying that right? Anna NG?
Yeah, I think so. Sure.
And that was like, I don't know, it just smacked me in the head. Like, this song is incredible.
Right.
And I was locked in from there.
Yeah. You're like, what was happening at the time? You're like, this is better than Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Yeah. I mean, I liked a lot of horrible music.
Well, yeah,
I've listened to Lives Throwing Copper more times than I can count.
My gosh. Tears have come from lightning crashes one too many times.
Dude, after the Oklahoma City bombing, in my high school, in rural Tennessee, they were like, we're going to have a moment of silence for the Oklahoma City bombing, and we're going to play Lightning Crashes by Live.
Funny, but it's amazing.
It was horrible. I mean, it's been enough time now that it's okay to laugh at it, but like, why did they play that?
Sure.
That's like not a song about a bombing.
That's really bizarre. That's really bizarre. I wonder how they deal with kids now with terrible things that happen, because it used to be like, not used to be, but just the way that the media worked. It was like there was one real bad thing we were close to a year.
Right.
And they would address it at school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember the same with Oklahoma City. Like they gathered us in a circle. They're like, do you have any questions? And I can't, like, what do they do now? Like, it just every day they're like,
yeah,
we're going to play Lightning Crashes again.
I think they just ignore it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
That's it. Or they do drills. Like,
yeah. Ugh, Jesus. That's so horrible.
Anyway, we live in dystopia. What are your suggestions for someone who arrives, the new Nashvillians, and they don't want to be assholes about being new Nashvillians? They just want to like understand what's happening, get into the scene, like find some places they're comfortable with. Like, how it could be overwhelming. Like when I know people who are coming here, or I talk with people who are new here, they're like, where do I even begin? Like,
right.
Where do people begin who want to go out and see or find some new and interesting music?
Yeah, I mean, it's all based on like what your general interests are, right? Like, I think if you're coming to town to visit, I've heard you talk about this on previous shows. If you're visiting Nashville, you have to go downtown. Like, everyone who lives here is like, oh, it's a hellscape. Fuck that place. I hate it. But like, it's fun if you're a visitor. Sorry, Roberts is fun as a visitor. Like, pedal taverns are hysterical. Like, they might be a nuisance to you when you're driving in your car, but like, it's funny. Like, there's a whole breed of animal down there now that is a pedal tavern. There's like a flatbed truck, there's a jacuzzi, there's a fire truck. Like, there's all these different variations. It's absurd.
Yeah,
it's absolutely absurd. You have to appreciate that. So I think as a visitor, sorry, you got to go down there. And there is actually good restaurants down there. There are good things to experience outside of the kitsch. If you live here and you're like, I know I love rock and roll, like, you should be hitting up the Cobra and you should be hitting up the East Room. Like, there's classic places like Exit Inn, Mercy Lounge. Those are phenomenal venues. Like, they're going to get really good touring acts. But if you want local bands, generally you want to go on the east side to some of these smaller places. Dark Matter, like I mentioned, is killing it. They're a really good venue. And then there's all these like sort of built-in nights, like the 5 Spot does $2 Tuesdays, which is pretty interesting. They do like a soul night, so it's like a soul dance party.
Yeah, on Mondays.
On Mondays, yeah. Rosemary, they do like lots of DJ nights. Girl Friday is one of them, and I know they do stuff on Saturdays too. Girl Friday happens on a Tuesday, by the way. Okay. Just so you know.
Okay, important.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about like the genre, right? Like what you're interested in seeing and experiencing. But if you live here, just go to 5 Points and start at 5 Spot. And then like, if that doesn't do it for you, go to the Cobra, go to the East Room, something like that.
Yeah, it's geographically manageable. Like,
yeah.
If you want to go like set up there and then just sort of wander around.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think you can't really go wrong. I'm not a huge fan of like the Bluebird or whatever. Like, songwriting in the round is a miserable experience for me. Yeah. Like, I don't want to see that. It's very, very boring.
What is this?
With songwriting in the round?
Yeah.
For those that don't know, songwriting in the round is like, you get 5 songwriters sitting on a stage, generally on stools with acoustic guitars each and a microphone, and each one plays one of their songs in a round. So it's like, here's my song that I wrote. You might remember it from when Billie Jean sang this, so it's the songwriters, it's the people behind famous songs or people aspiring to be those people. But to me, there's something embarrassing about it that I just can't deal with.
Yeah.
It's just like very it's very emotional, but it's also very transparent.
Sure.
Like we wrote these songs, like it just feels fake to me.
That stresses me out immediately.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to hate on it as a thing, because like everyone has their thing, and it's not my place to say what's good or bad. Like it's very subjective. Like if you like it, awesome. I'm not at all trying to throw judgment on someone in that regard. But from my perspective, never.
That is a people who are not from the place where we burn witches are very good at being critical in a way that leaves you feeling better after you heard it. Whereas in New England, we burned witches.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's great. So my last question is, what do you hope happens in this city? Things are changing quickly.
Yeah.
What just are you a go with the flow kind of person, or do you have a sense of how you'd like to see things go?
I would like to see things go in a direction which I think we're heading in, and it is organic, and I have almost no influence on whatsoever. Is that this diversity sort of crawls out from the underground and is a little more visible to everybody. Like it doesn't need to be like what Nashville is known for necessarily, but I think that we're starting to reach a point where like there's big events that celebrate this diversity that really shine a light on how much cool stuff can happen. So like Cold Lunch Recordings is a record label here in town. They have a ton of awesome bands on the label, and they've been doing these events like maybe once every 2 months or something, that it'll be like, I don't even know what it's themed around. It'll be like new music Saturday or whatever, but it's a big deal. They book a bunch of new bands and they like make an event out of it. It's not a show, it's an event, They have a thing called Spew Fest that like happens between the Cobra and the East Room, and you can bounce between the venues, and there's like 40 bands playing, and they're all psych rock bands, but they started expanding that to hip hop and electronic this year. And like as those grow, I think we're going to start seeing like a little more like visibility into those things. It won't just be like, oh, I like psych rock, so I went to Spew Fest. It'll be like, oh, Spew Fest is happening again, and it's like this big deal. Right. And it's it's expanded to 2 venues. Maybe it'll expand to 4 venues next year. Maybe it'll like kind of take over the city for a weekend or something. There's all kinds of events like that I think I would like to see kind of make their way. I guess that's not. I don't think I gave great answers on all of these.
I think that's a great. That's
it's so subjective. Like I don't know that. I think I'm supposed to say I want a band to skyrocket into big popularity and like have like really big monetary success. Which of course I want the bands that are coming from Nashville to like make it and be able to tour and be able to pay themselves. That's hugely important to be able to be a creative person like that and actually sustain yourself on it. I definitely want that. But for the city, I don't know that my goal is necessarily I want this to be a place where people can come and make music and get paid. I want people to be able to come here and be creative and be like acknowledged and appreciated for that creativity. Hopefully money is a byproduct of that, but I don't want someone who's like a keyboard noodler to come here and be like, well, there's not a place for me. It's like, yeah, there is.
Right. We
love this. Please make that music and help us bring it into the light.
Yeah, so, keep noodling.
Keep noodling, There's all kinds of good noodling. There's keyboard noodling. There's guitar noodling.
If I get merch, it's just Nashville Demystified. Keep noodling.
Yeah. Well, Olivia says from Bandsplainer, who you talked to, she said, all good bands are jam bands. And it was like, that is contentious. Yeah, and she just like, she stood her ground. She's like, no, all the good bands are jam bands.
Yeah.
But I think
But she's not saying all jam bands are good bands.
Right.
Just
and I think her definition of jam band is maybe more expansive than you would let it be. Like Radiohead.
Yeah.
Maybe a jam band.
Butthole Surfers.
Yeah.
Jam band. For sure.
Yeah.
Just a weird jam. But
yeah. You're like, oh, Fish. I don't agree with that. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Kraftwerk. Jam band.
Bro.
Yeah.
All of Kraftwerk. Right. You're right. All of Krautrock is a gem band. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. So Olivia's right.
Oh, what a controversial take to end on. And poor Olivia isn't even here to defend it.
Well, there's
She doesn't
nothing to
need
defend. She's
No,
right.
She's right.
Yeah.
She's right. All right, man. Thanks so much
thanks
for
for
doing
having me. Thanks for doing the show too.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Really, I can only do it because you let me. How do people find all the things?
Yeah. So at We Own This Town on all the things. I'll let you describe what Facebook is.
Yep. Absolutely.
Always a wonderful treat every episode to hear you take Facebook down a notch. But yeah, we're on Facebook.
It's working.
Yeah, it is. They're going private, man. They're going private because of you.
I did it.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at We Own This Town. WeOwnThisTown.net. Don't have the .com. Sorry. .net. And then me personally, I am at Uni. YEWKNEE. It is a word I made up that means nothing, and most people pronounce incorrectly.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, why not have some silent letter sounds in there?
Yeah, why not? And then my record label is YK Records, so YKRecords.com. I'm on the internet a lot in a lot of different places, so that was a long list.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Nashville Demystified. Thanks to Jesse LaFontaine for all things related to sound post-production. All the music in this episode is by different sources. You can find out more on the website. Every episode has a show-specific illustration provided by my longtime friend Tim Burns. They're pretty great. You can find them on the website. And in the coming weeks, we're going to talk about Black history. We're going to talk with writers in the area. We'll talk about comedy. We have, let's see, what else do we have an episode on? We have an episode on different kinds of music that are not, indie rock or country. We've got a lot coming up. If you have any suggestions, let us know. And follow, subscribe, do that. It all really does help. And thank you so much for everything. I'm Alex Steed. This is Nashville Demystified, which is brought to you by Knack Factory, and We Own This Town. Thanks so much.